Light from darkness. We need some lightness, perhaps, if you're like me in these days after Christmas, when the energy has been flowing so firmly and strongly and swiftly, and it's time to kind of ramp down a little bit. And so I was thinking about a church that once had a janitorial staff that needed help because things were busy. And the musician was interested in applying to help the janitor to have more people. It would be like if Eric was going to help Alex. Because there are probably some days when Alex wouldn't mind a little help. So Eric was asking about the position, or someone like him, fictional person, and said, does that mean if I help you in the janitorial position, I have to mind my keys and my pews? Okay, watch out. Good thing there aren't tomatoes ripe right now, right? They might come flying this way. Oh, goodness. And while I'm at it, the pastor that had what the parishioner thought was a very good sermon. Pastor, that was a good sermon this morning. And pastor said, appropriately, well, no, that really wasn't me. That was the Lord. And the person said, well, it wasn't that good. So, oh, goodness. Forgiveness and love is the theme of the message this morning. This love that came in the darkness so that the light shined in the darkness and the darkness could not overcome it. It's the story this morning of a Tavis, not Travis, but Tavis Smiley. I don't know if anybody knows Tavis Smiley. He is currently a nationally syndicated radio announcer. His job is a fascinating one. He gets to interview people that he finds fascinating, interesting, inspiring, or perhaps challenging in any field of life. People that are interesting. He gets to interview them on national radio. And I've heard a couple of his programs and presentations. He has a neat point of view. This is his story about his faith when he was 12 years old as he grew up to be a man of faith. His hero was Martin Luther King, and you'll understand why before the story is over. But as a 12-year-old, he grew up in a family of 10 kids, 7 in his immediate biological family, and 3 cousins who were living with them because their mother had been murdered. And then there was Big Mama, who's grandma, Big Mama, Mom and Dad, and these 10 kids in a double-wide trailer right there by Grissom Air Force Base. Some of you know where that is, over in Indiana, where they grew up. Affection and love was a powerful element of their family life. Now, their dad had to work, because remember how many people were here, 2 or 3 jobs to keep things going. Thank goodness he was a laid-back guy and kind of peripheral, providing for the family, while Mother was the one who ruled with the iron fist. She was the one whose feelings came out. When she was happy and loving, you knew all about it. And when she wasn't happy, you knew all about that too. She had her way. Dad was much more laid back. She was the expert at discipline, and as Tavis looked back, he realized that there needed to be a fair amount of discipline with 10 kids in a double-wide. There's no way around it. She was the one who had to be wise with their funds, as limited as they were, to make sure everybody got fed and clothed. And there were 2 values that were espoused in his life growing up. One was church. I love this one. Church for this wonderful family meant going 7 days a week. Count them. 7 days a week. There was always something at church every day, every night. Parents were strong leaders. Kids were expected to be role models in the church. That was one value. The other was you take your school seriously. You darn well better study and have your homework done and get the best grades that you're capable of. In this home, television was limited to things like Gilligan's Island or Love Boat, shows like that. There was no Soul Train with anybody shaking their booty and all of that kind of stuff, even though that's pretty mild compared to some of the things that happen today. I was talking about, this was in the 70s when Tavis grew up. Only gospel music was allowed. And Dad had saved up carefully his money to buy a stereo, and some of you will remember this, an 8-track cassette program to go with it, 8-track cassette player. They did not listen to the news. They did not talk about politics. Mom always said, God will provide everything we need. And Travis found out that it was fairly good going until he was 12 years old, when he was at Sunday school one morning. At Sunday school, the Sunday school teacher chose this method to reward the kids. When they got an answer right, they get a piece of candy. Now, that was not something that happened very often at Tavis's home. Candy was quite a treat. And given the environment that you've heard about, they were expected to study the Bible carefully, to listen to the teacher, and to be able to answer the questions. And so Tavis and his sister Phyllis, who were in the same class, would always have their hands ready. And they would be that was his biggest competitor. Whoever could get their hand up first, of course, would have the answer. If they had the answer right, would get the candy. And those two paid attention nonstop. They never missed a Sunday. They didn't always get every answer right, but they got most of them. The other kids, on the other hand, in the class would be much more likely to goof around and test the teacher. I know no one in here has ever had that happen as a Sunday school teacher, but you've probably heard about it. Kids sometimes don't pay attention. They goof around. One day, the teacher got so flustered and so upset, she left the room in tears, went to the pastor's office. I said, I'm done. I'm not teaching this class anymore. And in those days, the Sunday school was first. They went to church. Then in church, in the pew, the pastor got up and said publicly, "Shame on you, Tavis. Shame on you, Phyllis. Brother Smiley, you get your children under control. Shame on the Smiley family." Could you imagine coming from the pulpit? Now, they were wrongfully accused to start with, but then to publicly be shamed like that in front of the whole congregation. These leaders of the church, model kids, shamed like that. Wrongfully accused. Now, the ride home from church, as you imagine, was not a joyful affair. Dad did not question the minister. Tavis knew that there was no sense in calling the minister a liar, even though the minister didn't know the whole story. But when they got home, Phyllis was taken into the back room, and by her wailing, made Tavis's knees start to shake. He knew he was in for a rough time. And his turn was next. He said this is where he learned a life lesson, or beginning of it anyway, that Dad's face had upon it a scowl and a sense of rage that was emanating from him, something like he had never ever seen from his father in his whole life. And he took a coiled extension cord and he beat him on the back with it until there was blood running. It flowed, and his mother came in and said, "Dear Jesus, help us." At that point, he no longer loved his mother and his dad, and he wondered where in the world Jesus was. He said he learned about hate in that moment, hate in his heart, which grew, and it was there for a long time. The kids were in the hospital for several days to heal up, and they were placed in a foster home for children with a neighbor in the same town, but not allowed to come back to that home for some time. He missed his brothers and sisters at home, the family table with the good fried chicken and meatloaf, playing ball and all the activities. Although the elderly couple that took care of him, he said, showered him with affection and love. He was safe there, cared for. Finally, after some months, the boys were playing ball. All the kids were playing ball in the neighborhood, and Tavis met up with his brothers and went home with them. Not sure that's how it would work today with the social services system, but he did go home with them at that time. It was not the same. He swore he would never, ever forgive his parents for this hate that was still very powerful in his heart. Never going to forgive them. And so it was back to church. The patterns were the same. They coexisted. There was a deacon in the church as Tavis grew a little older that gave him a couple of 33 albums of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Said, "Tavis, I think you're getting old enough. You need to think about these things. Take it home and listen to them." And he was not sure how he would get to use the stereo, because that was a sacred little piece of equipment, and you better darn well be careful with it. But Tavis showed the albums to his dad. Dad said, "Okay, here's how you do this, Tavis." Very carefully showed him how to place the needle on the album, and there was a set of headphones. And Tavis put those headphones on one day, and when that voice, that booming voice of the preacher Martin Luther King Jr. came on that stereo, something inside him very deep resonated. And he felt a power that he'd never understood before in his life. It actually caused him to shake when he felt this kind of message that was coming. And he had heard lots of preachers in his life, obviously being in church every single Sunday, every single day of the week growing up. But this was different. Here were some of the words Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Can you picture Martin Luther King when he's wound up? There's conviction, there's power. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. He continued, we must develop a capacity to forgive, said Martin Luther King. Now remember that. This is a man, people were after him week after week, day after day, threatening his life at night, calling him on the phone, calling him every name in the book. We must develop a capacity to forgive. One who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love. Martin Luther King said, there is some good in the worst of us, and there's a little evil in the very best of us. We need to know how to forgive. Now, at 12 years of age, Tavis could not understand an adult who snapped from too much pressure. He could not understand that kind of rage that came from the pressure his father must have been under. But he knew that to hold on to the anger and the hatred that he had for his dad those years afterward was killing him. And so he read and he studied and he interpreted Dr. King's speeches, and he got on the speech team at school, and he actually won trophies for being in the speech contest and for presenting those points of view that Dr. Martin Luther King taught. And still there was something missing, even with that kind of success. Forgiveness is not an occasional act, said Martin Luther King Jr. It's not an occasional thing, but it's a way of life. Whew, goodness. Some years later, that hatred was still buried when Tavis was invited to be the MC and a speaker at a banquet for Muhammad Ali, one of his dad's heroes. And so he invited his dad, and the two of them went to the banquet. And after the banquet, the dad, who had had a marvelous time, said, thank you, Tavis, for this gift of time together and being able to be here with Muhammad Ali. What an honor, what a privilege. And then he said, I love you, Tavis. I love you. And Tavis said, Dad, I love you too. And that's the minute that the light shone in the darkness that the darkness had not overcome. That all that hurt and all that pain that Tavis had stuffed all those years and lived with until he was a man vanished. He realized forgiveness has to come before love. He realized the incredible nature and power of the gift that deacon gave to him as a young man. That God through him, through this deacon, sent a message of hope and a message of power, that the light would shine in the darkness, and the darkness could not overcome it. And so in this very day, as Tavis interviews men and women around the world, sharing and learning about their lives, he's a man of great faith and not ashamed about it one bit. But what a story, and how he learned to become a full man of faith in his maturation process. I thank God for the truth that there is light, and that the light shines in the darkness, and that the darkness has not overcome it. Amen.